So this is going to be a special episode of Erasing Shame. We have a special guest today, who's a dear, dear, dear friend and sister of mine, named Eunice Lee. Do you go by Eunice Song Lee or Eunice Lee?
Eunice Lee. I just left song on Facebook for people to recognize
Ah,
who I was.
kind of remember. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Eunice has written and published a book called More Christ, More Me. And we have the opportunity today to hear more about Eunice's journey of writing this book, kind of the story behind it, because we always want to get the story that brought you to this journey. And then just hear a little bit more about the book for those people who are new to, especially AAPI Christian women writers. I feel like it's a group of very I was going to say in Korean 귀한, but in English, valuable women, because there aren't that many. So I'm so excited to hear more today. So Eunice, if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, kind of, we can even talk about how you and I met and connected, and then the journey that brought you to this amazing book, which is available on
Okay.
Amazon and on your website by Eunice Lee, or is it Eunice Lee Author now?
By eunicelee.com.
Yes.
That's my Instagram handle is Eunice Lee Author. So
Awesome. Yeah, we'll post
yeah.
all that in the kind of notes. Yeah, if you could tell us a
Sounds
little
good.
bit
Sounds
about
good.
you.
Yeah, I was born March 25th, 1984. JK. So I was, but I'm originally a Seattle native, was born and raised there, moved down to LA in 2009 to attend Fuller Seminary. In Seattle, I grew up at my dad's church. So, yes, I am a pastor's kid, AKA PK. And it was a Korean American church or like a Korean immigrant church. And if you grew up in that setting, that might immediately conjure up very specific memories, very specific cultural setting. It's kind of funny how, you know, Korean immigrant churches, no matter where you are in the world, they like do exactly the same things, like summer retreats, lots of bonding, everybody is like crying the last night. Um, you have the skit competition, song competition, what have you.
Yeah, it's
It's
like a
funny. It's
blueprint
like,
out there or
yeah,
something.
I don't even know like where it started, how it originated, but it's wherever you go, it's exactly the same. So
Yeah.
that was a big part of growing up for me. Even though the school or in the city that I grew up in was actually predominantly Caucasian. So yeah, that was childhood, adolescence, and then like being a pastor's kid was its own experience as well. I can go into that more later if you want, or if the conversation goes there. But yeah, I moved down to LA 2009. Like I said, this is how I met Hannah. We became roommates. Um, the story that we often tell people about how we met is how Hannah did not like me. Or she was very guarded with me when she first saw me because her first impression of me was it that you just thought I was
Like perfect church
too.
girl, like too good to be true. And I was like, there's no way this is authentic.
Yeah.
I've never
Just
seen this before in real life.
oh, the irony of writing a book about authenticity too. So
Yes.
yeah, so she met me, she didn't like me, but we ended up living together and she ended up loving me.
Well, I think to be honest, I was like, wow, she's like the physical embodiment of all that every Korean Christian parent has told their daughters to be. And I was like
Oh,
intimidating. And I was like, there's no way that's real. There's no way. Because it was this
what's so
image, right? And people had told me
yeah.
that you were coming.
Uh,
Um, yeah. People like you scared me because I was like, I want to be around real people. And then in no time at all, I was like, she's real. which we will hear more about today.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that though, because I don't know how much of a tangent this is, but I went to Korea um my between my sophomore junior year of college to go to Yonsei. A lot of like second gen they'll go there for studying abroad and to study Korean. And that's actually where I met my husband. But this story is not about him. This story is about another guy who was also a PK, and we ended up having like, I don't know if it was like a DTR of sorts. Like he kind of was just like acting funny with me after I started dating my husband. And I was like, what's going on? And so like he kind of just had like a confession session. I don't know. Where he was kind of like, well, he was a PK. Did I say that? He's a PK. And he was like, my dad always wanted me to bring home this good Korean Christian girl. And I just literally thought that didn't exist until I met you. So it's just funny that you say that because I'm like the archetype, apparently.
At least on the surface.
At least on the surface. That's the key, right? Like for sure. Because
Yeah.
yes. And yeah, that, I guess that kind of is a segue into just about the book because,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I was really good at, I don't want to say performing, but, projecting and trying to embody um, the different expectations that were around me, as I think on top of, being a PK and all of that, I'm also what's called a highly sensitive person. And I don't know if people have heard about that, but it became more like a personality trait that was more well known through the research of a psychologist named Dr. Elaine Aron. And, it's just basically, she has said that there's like about 20% of the population who would qualify as being HSP. And that means that the way that your brain works, the way that you process stimuli is just at a deeper level than the rest of the population. And it, does that mean one ruminates? Yeah, I would say so. I'm definitely a ruminator. But, the other is just how you absorb and internalize stimuli around you. And so it was kind of just, I don't want to say a recipe for disaster, but, I was just very much inclined to be able to pick up on the different kind of standards and expectations, even like desires or hopes of other people around me, and kind of internalize and adopt that and try to be that. And that went for being a pastor's kid in a Korean American church, and you have, like those kind of standards there of like what a good Christian looks like, and then also then what a good Korean daughter looks like, and then on top of that, like, um, you know, as a member of the community, like whether you're leading or you're serving, there's just so many different layers there. And then, being a Korean American in a high school that was predominantly white, trying to fit in there and uh, present as white as possible, present as closely to the dominant culture there. But then there was always like tension because, there my Korean Christian setting was so different from that more white high school. And then, just trying to be Christian among a bunch of teenagers who are living their lives, experimenting and whatnot. So yeah, there was a lot of layers going on there. And yes, I did have I just can't help but, like, laugh because it's I must have done a really good job because, my nicknames in high school, like Miss Perfect, or even just Hannah, what you said, or that guy in Korea, it's just like, "Oh, I never expected to meet, that Korean Christian girl," whatever.
Mhm.
So, I don't know. Sorry, I just, like, think about it, I'm like, I just can't help laughing because yeah, I must have done a pretty good job, but,
Yeah.
it definitely had its, um, price, I would say. Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. On Erasing Shame, one of our missions is to bring things into the light and talk about them openly so that we can erase shame because shame thrives in the dark,
Mm.
in secrecy, and not sharing with others. I love that in your book, you really chronicle your journey, working through so many of those layers that you just mentioned, family, being Korean or Asian American, being a female in that context, theology, mental
Mhm.
health, intersectionality. I mean, so much. And I actually am very blessed and fortunate to have, I got to give
Yay!
my 2 cents. But I, basically wrote like, this is the book that I wish I'd had. It would have saved me years of
Mm.
turmoil and probably therapy too. um, but I mean, it's like it feels like years of therapy and cultural identity formation seeking, like distilled, right? And
Mm.
it's just so compact, concise. I mean, it's a very thin book for a lot of really dense, life giving
Yeah.
content. But I'd love to know, or maybe we could share with our listeners what brought you to the book, because a lot of people do go through these journeys of identity formation, healing, deconstruction, reconstruction, and it never actually results in anything tangible to share with others.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what helped birth this book because it is very much
Yeah.
like birthing something.
So, I would say that, Hannah, the experience that I shared in the book, you just mentioned yourself, like how familiar it was for you, right? It was something that you wished you had as a kid. And, this, it was just with my peers as we were getting older, becoming, young adults and stuff, we were just having the same conversations over and over and over again, just this continuous battle, internal battle, external battle, like with our parents as we were trying to kind of come into our own as adults and people in our identity. But always this push and pull because of what our parents wanted, how we were convicted or led or felt played to our strengths as well as our passions, and there was just this continuous conversation that was happening and but no way through. We were just going in circles. And it wasn't until I got to Fuller um, that I was given some tools and new frameworks to look at my family dynamics, my church context, and all of that, and to look at it, in a way that made sense and gave me a way to resolve a lot of that tension. And I think, the big tension, and I don't know, maybe this is something that more kind of collectivist cultures can relate with, because, America, it's such an individualistic culture, and it's very much like, it's all about the individual, what you want to do, independence, seeking your own path, all of that. But, in Korean culture, as well as I'm sure other Asian cultures, etc., there is such a strong tie to honoring your parents, being sensitive to what they want. Um, yeah, just that filial piety, right? And so we're growing up in this context of, we should do what we want to do. But then on the other side, we really feel like this almost like this dedication, right, to our parents. And not only that, we have the immigrant backstory, of how much they have sacrificed and how hard they've worked to give us this life that even enables us to say that, oh, I want to live my own life. I get to choose what I want to do with my own life, And so there's just a lot of kind of burden and guilt, I would say, that comes in that your parents have like worked so hard to give you this opportunity and this gift, but there's almost like shame in the fact that you have that gift, right? So, anyways, so I was like, where am I going with this? What was the original question? It happens all the time. So, yeah, just I think there's that tension, right? That push and pull. And so, yeah, Fuller, specifically the class, family systems therapy, the class just gave me a way to look at that dynamic and that tension and to resolve it. I don't know how much I should go into it without giving away, what's in the book. But anyway, so that experience, having that experience, and then I'm going back to my friends who are still in that cycle, that continuous conversation and that tension with their parents and all of that. And I just, it's specifically, one conversation with a friend in the car, dropped her off at the airport, and on the way back, I was like, oh man, like if only I could share with her and others who are going through the same thing all that I've learned, because I just feel like I've reached such a better place where I now know how to honor my parents, but also know how to be my own person and say that it's okay to follow the path that I believe is right for me, that I believe God is leading me in, even if my parents disagree with that. And yeah, that is not actually in conflict. That is actually not, an oxymoron to say, I can both disagree with my parents and honor them. Right. And so I just started thinking about that and, just kind of this like slowly, this little idea of like, oh, maybe I should write it down. Wait. Like, I mean, I journal and stuff, but that's not quite like what I'm like, that's not going to be useful, right, for people to actually learn from. And yeah, because, the conversation I'd had with my friend, I had attempted to kind of explain some of the stuff I learned, but how do you, how do you share like 3, 4 years of like, of synthesis, just all this information and process that you've learned through seminary and stuff. So it was
Yeah.
rough. So I was like, oh, maybe I should write a book. I was like, oh, 'cause it's very scary because I don't see myself as a writer. And but I kept thinking about it, and um, my husband was all for it, and I I say that because I often have many ideas that I want to do, many projects, and you know, usually he kind of tries to calm me down a little bit because I tend to overextend myself. So the fact that he was for it to me was a good sign. And then I just talked with a couple of friends, and then you know, within the span of like 1 week, there was one verse in particular from Esther. The verse where um, oh shoot,
For such a time.
Mordecai says to Esther, yeah, who knows that you've been put in this position for such a time as this, right? And that was a verse that like had come up like a few months ago prior to that point, like at a retreat. a pastor had been praying over me and prophesying over me and had prayed that verse over me. And at the time, I was like, I don't know what that is for. I don't know. But
Mhm.
that week, when I was kind of mulling over this book idea, that I was talking with a friend and I was telling her, like, oh, I don't know though, by the time I'm done writing this book, will it still even be relevant? It's just going to take me, I just knew already it was going to take me forever to write it. So I was like, at that point, like, we'll all be so old. Like, will we still be struggling with our parents? Like, I don't know. And I was like, about to say all these kind of like reservations that I had, and that verse came back to me, and I was like, oh, because it was a question of timing for me, right? That I was kind of saying, but then that verse came back of like, how do you know that it's not exactly for a time like this? And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, all right, God, if that's the verse that, I'm gonna or if that's what you're saying, I'm gonna take that verse as like the sign, like that this is really something I need to like put myself into. And then a few days later, Hannah, I don't know if you remember this, having this conversation in our kitchen in our condo, when we were at the condo, at the kitchen, you're visiting, hanging out, and I was telling you pretty much similar reservations that I had. And, out of nowhere, you're like, well, Eunice, this is what I've been feeling lately, is that, that it is like there's so many Asian, because, oh, one of the things you were saying were like, oh, there's this book, there's that book. And I was like, well, if there's already all these books out there, what's the point? Like, it, what do I have to add to the conversation if it's already out there? And then, Hannah, you're like, no, I think that right now it's like a time for especially Asian American women to share their stories. And it's for such a time as this that God is calling these Asian American women to share their stories. And I was like, I like was like, fuck. Like I like collapsed to the floor and I was like, Hannah, what did you just say? So I honestly, I'm not saying that I think it always takes these very like kind of signs or direct, like God speaks, in an audible voice to tell you what to do. But I also sometimes just feel like God and God's um, graciousness and knowing my kind of, you know, timidness and like my how I hold back on certain things, that like sometimes that's what I need, is just that very direct, clear directive, you know, to do something.
Yeah.
Cause yeah, it's not something I would have naturally
Hmm.
necessarily chosen to do. Cause yeah, again, I don't see writing as a strength of mine. So
So as a published author who's
I know. Well,
also a painter, a carpenter, a lettering uh, expert. um, no, I thank you so much for detailing that part of your journey. Um, I would love to hear. There's two things I wanted to kind of touch upon. Was one was mental health, because
mm,
we're talking about family systems and
yeah,
Augsburger's class. It's a lot of kind of mental health ideas. And since I'm a therapist, I really loved that you were
yeah,
able to integrate so beautifully your narrative, so your life story and journey. And there's I actually, when you were writing it, I was like, I want more story. Tell me more about Eunice and moments. Like you have such a poignant one in your conversation with your mom. Like I love those pieces, especially the therapist. And then you beautifully and deftly weave in theology and your journey of deconstructing. And then as you reconstruct, there's a lot of like solid mental health things that I think a lot of people who ordinarily would never go to a therapist, never talk about mental health because of the stigma in our community, right? Like if you're a good enough Christian or close enough with God, you'll never need to go to therapy, kind
mm,
of, false ideas. Yeah. But you break all that down and you make it so approachable and safe because the vehicle that you're sharing all this through is your life story, right? So it's approachable for people. And I believe that that act alone breaks down and erases shame because you're willing to share your life. And so you're breaking down multiple barriers, right? Yeah, I would just love to hear more about that because you and I talk quite a bit about mental health, theology, the intersections,
Oh gosh.
intersectional identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where to even start? Let's see. So, yeah, where to even start? I think, um, see, this is why I was like, can I write a book? Because my thoughts can just go, like, how do you focus? Um, I mean, the reality is that, I talked about my childhood, adolescence, and how I was really good at um, projecting that kind of ideal archetypical
I don't think there's one way to say archetypal,
archetypal,
archetype of.
ideal, yeah, Christian Korean female. Um, and it came at a price. And that price was most evident after moving to LA and serving as a youth pastor at a large Korean American church. And I just was placed in a situation where that kind of old way of functioning didn't work because the demands on myself physically, emotionally, mentally was just too much. I think I underestimated what a toll moving from, my very close knit community that I grew up in, transitioning out of that into a city like LA, where you're just surrounded by people who are kind of in and out of your life because people are moving in from somewhere else and then they're moving out somewhere else. There's just so much shifting. I would, make friends and like we would talk about the need for community, put that effort in, and then all of a sudden, somebody's getting married or somebody decides to um, transfer out of Fuller to a different, location or this or that. And it was exhausting, and so I didn't have the same social support that I had had and was used to. I mean, my church was so close knit, it's there was just so much. I call it scaffolding. I would say, even with my family, as like we had certain dynamics that were maybe that were unhealthy, but there was just such a scaffolding there, especially for me as like the youngest of four kids, the baby of the family. So I was always used to this, you know, I didn't realize how used to I was having people around me to support me and care for me. Even as I was also trying to kind of like be independent and not depend on anybody else at all. Right. So, because again, I was trying to be perfect. Right. So, yeah, I underestimated how much that transition took a toll or was taking a toll on me. And then I was placed in the position of leadership and shepherding, right? Uh, Young kids who had a lot of needs, I mean, teenagers, they got lots going on, right? And
Well, in addition to that, these are inner city kids from like
right,
various SES backgrounds. So there was another layer of urban inner city ministry.
right, yes. So suburban kids are very different from urban kids for sure. Yeah, yeah. And, just and then it was a big church. And there was a church that also, just had so much of their own trauma. Now I can see it so much more clearly now looking back because this was a church that had actually resulted out of a church split. It started off like with hundreds of members. So it didn't have that like wouldn't necessarily look at it and think like church plant, but it was a church plant. But almost because it was like so big at the beginning, there was so much to do, right? And it was very, um, I mean, I guess overwhelming. Although I tried to exude that I had everything under control, just like I always did. And so, yeah, and so I basically got burnt out. I was there for 3 years and couldn't, like, knew that things were not good with me. I was exhausted, like exhausted. Hannah could probably attest to that since we lived together, but pretty sure you were pretty exhausted too. I think we were all, yeah, pretty
We were
exhausted.
all exhausted, and we found, I think, a lot of comfort in knowing that we're all struggling and doing our best. However, I didn't walk away with the kind of trauma, religious trauma that you did, because I was serving at a tiny little church
Mm,
that was maybe actually closer in structure and culture to your Seattle church.
sure.
I was in the South Bay, very suburban, middle class,
Yeah.
super tight knit
Yeah.
families that had grown up
Mhm.
together. And we actually would have maybe better been suited to swap churches,
Yeah, maybe.
ironically.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned that, that reminds me too of just, like I was talking about how close knit it was up in at my church back in Washington. Just this feeling that like people had your back, right? And so I came into like all my like networks in LA, serving at the church, at trying to make friends at Fuller. I kept going in with that same mentality of like, okay, I'll get your back, you're gonna get mine. Cause that's how I grew up. Those are the kind of people I had around me. So I kept basically giving, 110% to everybody. Like, here's my heart. I am here for you. I will be your BFF, no matter who it was. And, wasn't getting that in return. And not because people were mean or selfish or that kind of thing. It just, culturally different, the realities of life, people's priorities, busyness. They had their own kind of social networks too established if they had been in LA longer or born and raised in LA. But yeah, like at church too, like, I think it was a lot more of that kind of professionalized environment versus like my very family oriented environment at my home church. And so, I kept on just putting so much out, but wasn't getting that same kind of care and investment in return. So there was definitely just, I don't know, I wouldn't call that trauma so much as just you, like, just get to a point in terms of your capacity that you're like, it's like you're not even running on fumes anymore. Like you're
Yeah,
just
yeah,
so I don't even know what could be beyond depleted because
right.
like yeah, like you're just so gone. Like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And so that kind of exhaustion, I guess in that way could be traumatizing being that exhausted. But
I mean,
so
I I come from a background where I'd done cross-cultural inner city ministry, and I walked away with trauma, not because people weren't loving and supportive, because in the Hispanic inner city immigrant community, very very family close knit, but it's also like secondary vicarious trauma of like your, especially in the K-Town LA area, these kids and families come with so much baggage already, and for you to
yeah,
constantly be interacting and HSPs are also known as
yeah,
empaths. You're
right.
absorbing all that, right? And then there's something in LA, I think it's our culture, spirituality, but the transients gets to LA natives. So our
Mm,
boundaries look really different. And it's almost
sure.
you have to jump through hoops to really get into the inner circle of somebody's community. And that can
Yeah,
take years. but the average, Korean immigrant church youth pastor, I mean, what, 6 months to 2 years is like our
Yeah.
reported average, and we're all burnt
Oh,
out. Yeah,
so
we're all
I was
burnt
above
out.
average by staying for 3 years.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
mean, I get an A. I'm just joking.
No, but really, yeah, you get an A plus there for having
No,
through that.
let's not use
But,
those
you
standards
know,
anymore.
I mean, I think any LA Chandosa who's listening to this, would be like, yeah, like totally vibing and understanding. But the boundaries, I think that's something that you've alluded to and kind of explored a lot. Setting boundaries
Yeah.
is hard. It's not something
Yes.
we're taught or modeled in church. In fact, we're discouraged, especially as female,
Yeah.
as Christians, right? And as Asians, to not set boundaries so that we are accessible to everybody. But then, then what's left? There's nothing left.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Oof.
Eunice, we're kind of coming to maybe the end of a good time limit here. Um, I think we definitely need to record a part two, maybe with some questions from like listeners and stuff to process later. But um,
Yeah.
I know that you have included a lot of like content in here that people can, like, a really great appendix with resources and next steps. There's also reflections. I love that so much, at the end of each chapter or each section. And I mean, I've been telling you, you can make a Bible study out of this. You can do a support group. We can do retreats and workshops. And of course, a lot of these things would take a lot of time and energy. But in the future, like I'm really excited for the possibilities that your narrative and your story can bring. I would love to know kind of maybe one thing that you really hope comes out of this book, and if you have like a kind of a message for your target demographic.
Oh, wow.
Take your time.
Hmm. I mean, I think that the content of my book can speak to people from different cultural backgrounds. One of the people who wrote an endorsement for my book was one of my good friends, Alex Mora, who is Latino. And yeah, he totally was like, "Whoa, this totally speaks to my family system." But and I love that and I hope for that. But the thing that just keeps kind of resonating for me is moments, when Hannah, you talk about like you wish you had this book when you were young. Or even just when you're talking about, you know, especially female leaders in the church. And my heart just really goes out to those young women as well as women leaders who have been given those kinds of messages that, yeah, about their identity, who they should be, that then leads them down a path of burnout, of exhaustion, of depression, of emptiness. And yeah, I think that is kind of just what breaks my heart. And just the thought of so many women out there who um, have really tried their best to be good, to bring good to others, but they are hurting or damaging or wounding themselves or getting wounded in the process, right? And so I don't know if I think if my book or um, the conversations that come out of the book, or it doesn't even have to be like them reading the book, but just being able to have um, maybe people who do read the book have conversations then with the women who are in their network, right? They're given different language, different um, perspectives, right, to then equip these women with, so that, yeah, maybe they don't have to walk down that same path of trauma, of depletion, all of that, So I think, but rather, hopefully, to a life where they can really flourish and lean into who they are and feel like that's okay. I feel like sometimes we don't, it's just tough, like I feel like as women, we're just giving so many messages of how and who we should be. And the church doesn't really help that when it tells us, when there's a general message or sermon being given about sacrificing to others, and it's just, yeah. So I think for women to know that it's okay for them to flourish, and that is not self centered by any means, right? So,
Yeah. At your book party, you hand lettered these beautiful canvas bags. Would you share with us what you wrote?
so I wish I had the bag to show you. I don't. I wrote, I am safe, inhale, I am good, exhale. I One of the tools, and I think I do talk about that in the appendix of the book, is I use breathing prayers. And some people, like if you go outside the Christian circle, they might call it like a mantra or like meditation or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, I will take like um, a truth based on something I know that God has spoken, and I will inhale, on the inhale, pray that, and on the exhale, pray the second line. And it just really roots me, because the reality is, when we go out into the world, there's always going to be lots of different messages hitting us at the same time. And a lot of times, it's not just a mind it's not just happening on the mind level, but in our bodies, right? We have these memories of what we should be like stored in our bodies too. So we hear a certain sermon, or we see an ad or a billboard that says this or that, and it will literally, our bodies will react to that, which will then trigger it to our minds, right? And so we're right back where we were before, thinking like, oh, I have to be this way. And so the breathing prayers are actually a way to retrain your body and your mind to engage both. And so, in those moments where you notice, if you grow in that awareness to know when you're being triggered in a certain way, and thinking like, oh, pressured or self-conscious, or feeling embarrassed or ashamed that you have to be a certain way, and you feel your fight or flight, kind of system like in high gear, then these breathing prayers, for me, I'm safe, I'm good. It's just, for me, it's a good reminder that, like, yeah, it's not based on those standards or those messages that are coming from elsewhere. Um, but yeah, that this is, no matter what, in Christ, I'm safe and I'm good. So,
Thank you. Yeah. So this has been a conversation with Eunice Lee, More Christ, More Me, one woman's spiritual journey of finding her true self. I thank you so much for your time. I feel like I've had a therapy session together. You would make a fine
thank
therapist, by the way. Um,
oh,
and your book
thanks
is
for
available
having
again
me.
on Amazon and also your website. Can you
I
kind of
would say,
review your
I would
social
say
media?
mainly Amazon.
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah, the website was just a more of a promotional
Okay.
time for
Yeah.
pre-launch, and for autographs.
Mhm.
People wanted them. And so, but yeah, so you can find my book on Amazon. And did you
If
want,
people want to get in touch with you through
oh,
social
sure.
media or website,
Yeah,
or kind of reach out, how can they reach out?
yeah. So I'm on Instagram. I'm on Instagram and my handle is Eunice Lee author. I do have another Instagram that is more dedicated to my art. So if you find me there, it's by _ Eunice Lee. You can see the link to my author page. I'm also on Facebook under Eunice Lee author as well. And then my website is by eunicelee.com. Well, I feel like I need to like streamline that. It's like all different. It's because, eunicelee.com was taken. So I had to come up with some like different iterations. So, but anyway, yeah. And on my website, there is a contact page. So, but I would say if you want to contact me, either Instagram or Facebook are probably the best ways.
And I'm about to give birth in a few days here, but once I'm up and running again as a normal human being, I hope we can do some kind of like book signing or something where people can maybe, or a book reading where so we can gather some women to ask you questions live. Process through some of the chapters or content. But we're very excited for what will come out of this in due
Yeah.
time.
If people don't know already, Hannah is my informal public relations agent. She just
Yeah, thank you so much. And if listeners or viewers out there, if you have more questions, please reach out to us on erasingshame.com. We have YouTube, Facebook, djchuang.com also is a great website to check out. But we hope to have Eunice again on Erasing Shame, maybe with the 3 other co-hosts.
would
I'll
be
be out
an
of commission for a
honor.
while, but yeah, so excited. Thank you so much. And this has been a special episode of Erasing Shame, a interview with Eunice Lee, the author of More Christ, More Me. We hope everybody
Thanks,
out there is
Hannah.
taking care. And yeah, if anybody has questions, reach out. And especially if you found some of this information, something that you want to engage with further, please reach out to us or to Eunice on our handles. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of the Erasing Shame podcast. Connect with us at erasingshame.com. That's erasingshame.com. And you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts.